Hi, I'm Lauren Young. I'm an editor at Reuters, and I'm so thankful that you're joining us today to talk about how to prepare, how to plan for an emergency, which has been so important in the past year. To get us started, I am going to introduce Vishal Jain. Vishal is the head of financial wellness strategy and development at Prudential, and he's coming to us live from Summit, New Jersey. Vishal, take it away.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you all for joining today. I'd also like to thank Reuters for hosting today's event and our panelists who are going to give us their perspectives on, this really important issue, which I think obviously everything that we've lived through in the last year has really highlighted. How do you prepare for the unexpected, right? How do you prepare for that emergency financially and also more broadly? And, Prudential does a lot of consumer research. Just a few months ago, we did a financial wellness pulse check across Americans and found 46% of Americans say they're struggling financially. 64% of those who have a job say that they're having trouble meeting their financial obligations. 24% say they're having that they're behind on their bills. And these are individuals that are still employed. And partly what's driving that is you're seeing, incomes have gone down. So we're seeing more people than in the past say that their income has gone down to below $30,000. And that's having a disproportionate impact on women-led households and minority-led households. And so the question is sort of, as we look ahead, right, as we look about, coming out of the pandemic, we don't know what the next shock will be, right? And how do we help families and individuals become as resilient as possible? And at Prudential, we believe employers have a big role to play in that. Employers provide valuable benefits, retirement benefits, insurance benefits. And in the last several years, many employers have been implementing financial wellness programs with financial education services, tools, other services to help people prepare financially. And I think as we now come out of the pandemic and look ahead over the next several years, I think we're going to see the next evolution of financial wellness, which is really to help people as holistically as possible. How do we help people build emergency savings? But even going beyond that, how do we help people get their debt under control? How do we help people manage their student loan debt, which might be impacting them? How do we help people with caregiving issues, which sometimes forces them to leave the workforce? And if we can help people with all these issues, we can start to build more resiliency for whatever comes next. We don't know what the next pandemic will be or the next shock will be. But if we help people get their financial house in order well before it, we're helping them at that moment in time, but we're also helping them be more resilient when the next emergency happens. And we think that focus is a critical part of ultimately helping every American build a rock solid retirement plan. It's caring for their holistic set of financial wellness needs today. It's giving them access to well-designed retirement plans that optimize their contributions and their employers' contributions. It's giving them access to solutions to generate income in retirement. And it's also figuring out how to engage people how they want to be engaged, whether it be online, virtually, in person, to help them make the best decisions possible and take the best actions to both prepare for retirement, but also prepare financially for emergencies. So with that, I'm really looking forward to hearing the perspectives of our panelists on this. And Lauren, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. So I want to introduce our panelists, and I've planned many events in the past year. It is sometimes very hard to get people, even though it's virtual. Every single one of our panelists said yes at the first ask. So you are literally getting the A team here. It's everybody asked. From the get-go, I want to introduce Greg McBride of Bankrate. Greg is a source and a friend for a really long time. He knows everything about saving, about debt, and I'm going to let you say a little bit about yourself, but just hold on, Greg. I want to introduce everybody else here. We've got Margarita Cheng. Margarita is just outside of Washington, D.C. in Rockville, Maryland. She's a certified financial planner. She's at a firm called Blue Ocean Global Wealth, and she has just the sweetest voice. So I'm excited they're going to get to listen to her for the next hour. And finally, we have Gary Cunningham coming to us live from the nation's capital. Gary runs an organization called Prosperity Now. It's an amazing organization, really moving the needle on helping people with financial capability, financial literacy, and it's Financial Literacy Month. So what better topic than to talk about how to save for an emergency? I guess the first question I have for my panel is, why is saving for an emergency so important? And I'm hoping, Greg, you can kick it off and tell us a little bit about it.
Well, thank you so much, Lauren. Thanks for having me. And it's great to be with everybody on this such a very important topic. As if a pandemic-induced recession with the tens of millions of job losses wasn't enough, even prior to the pandemic. One of the consumer polls we had done at bankrate.com found that 28% of households had experienced a major unplanned expense within the preceding 12 months, and the average amount of that was $3,500. So with those kind of odds, every 4 years, you're going to have a major unplanned expense. That's, not to say nothing about, the smaller expenses that come along in the meantime. I think the other benefit too, beyond the numbers, peace of mind. Nothing helps you sleep better at night knowing you've got some money tucked away in the event of unexpected expenses popping up.
Is it really sleeping at night though? Because people always say that that's a litmus. I mean, is it sleep? Is it nervous stomach? What is it that really keeps people grounded financially? I'll let you answer that, Greg.
Yeah, I think two really areas of personal finance that really are major components of financial security and stability, and that's housing and emergency savings. And if you have stability on those two fronts, it really goes a long way toward financial security. And with that comes, however you measure it, sleeping at night, lower stress levels, whatever. And as employers, studies have shown that financial stress is one of the biggest contributors to underproductivity in the workplace. So I think, there's clearly an added benefit there as well.
Gary, I have a question for you. How do we know that Americans are not prepared for an emergency? What data do you have? What research have you looked at to show that people really need help? That's a question for Gary.
Prosperity Now is focused on emergency savings for a while now. And what we found is that in our research in April of 2020, that over 45 million households in America did not have enough cash on hand to cover for an emergency. More specifically, they didn't have enough money to replace 3 months of income at the federal poverty guidelines. So we know this issue is important, and that the COVID crisis that we have also just exacerbated those statistics. We saw that hourly wages for workers, many of whom are racial and ethnic minorities and women, were much more vulnerable to the effects of the crisis that we're in. The pandemic has devastated millions of low-income and moderate-income families, as about 8 million people were pushed into poverty and into unemployment during this period that we've been in. So yeah, this is very severe, and it's something that was an issue before the crisis, but it has been exacerbated by the crisis that we're in today.
So, one of the things that Greg talked about, and I think Gary carries on to what you're saying here, is the stress, the financial stress. It's so palpable. Margarita, you're a financial planner, so you're helping people plan, for the future. I'm curious to see, for you to explain a little bit about how financial stress impacts people and how does it derail future goals, short-term, long-term goals?
Sure. Well, I am a certified financial planner, or as I like to say, CFP Pro. And financial planning is really a process. And the process means taking a look at people's assets, liabilities, income, expenses, and of course, insurance. So your first line of defense is going to be building your foundation or strengthening your foundation, which is cash flow management, cash reserves, and debt. And these are all really important because so many times people think financial planning is investing, and they use those terms interchangeably, but investing is an important component of financial planning. It's important to distinguish savings from investing and speculation. And investing shouldn't be speculation. So investing would be for longer term life goals.
And in terms of the stress that you see in your clients when they come to you, I imagine people come to a financial planner because they need help. What do you see? What kind of stress is there?
I mean, I think that making sure that they are going to be okay is valid. I mean, people are concerned. People have experienced loss of income and volatility of income. And it is true that communities of color, also older workers, we do tell people it does make sense to defer Social Security till full retirement age. But this has been very stressful for people who had every intention of waiting till full retirement age, but they find themselves in a situation where they may have to take Social Security earlier than they had anticipated.
Greg, how can an emergency fund help? And how, you know, you've set out lots of ground rules over the time at Bankrate on how to build one and what, but how can it help? What does it do?
Well, we talk about it as, you know, emergency savings in the context of unplanned expenses, job loss, income disruption. But I think another way to look at this also is as an opportunity fund. You know, when you have money in savings and as you build a sufficient cushion, it also gives you greater financial flexibility to, you know, if you know, a household wants to reduce work hours for one parent to stay home with a child, having that savings cushion is a valuable prerequisite for that. If you want to start your own business, I mean, that's not going to happen if you don't have some savings accumulated. You know, even the things like, you know, those, you know, you get the call from your friend, from your roommate from college who says, hey, I'm getting married and I want you to be in the wedding. You know, it's having that savings enables you to say yes, even if there's a hefty price tag to it.
Margarita, how do you make sure that people don't tap this wonderful emergency fund that they've built for saving for a rainy day for things like travel or, you know, going to a concert? You know, I think post-pandemic, everybody's worried that, you know, the world is, everybody's just going to be out living the time of their lives because they've been cooped up for so long. So for people who may have an emergency fund, how do you keep them from reading it?
No, absolutely. We are worried that people feel cooped up, cabin fever, and they're going to party like it's 1999. But with that in mind, I think that I like what Greg said about the opportunity fund. I think that this is how I frame the conversation with clients. The reason why you have a cash reserve is for any emergencies or opportunities that arise. And I understand that we're giving up some lifestyle today. I just say it like it is. But that is, you're giving up a little bit today to ensure that you have more stability in the future. And I think I've had clients say to me, you know, Rita, that was a total game changer for me. I understand that this is why I'm saving. And it also helps people make informed decisions. So I can really quantify this. Property and casualty insurance. So that would mean your homeowners and your auto. So I had clients that experienced significant increases due to no fault of their own. And because they had cash reserves, they felt that they could actually increase the deductible and not have to take such a hit. And that was, they were so proud of themselves, and understandably so. So I think that it's all about balance. It's getting to know the clients. And then the last thing I'll say is sometimes clients feel bad about rating their reserves. Like one lady needed new tires. She's like, I paid down my credit card. Oh my God, I need new tires. And I told her, I was like, you know, that's safety. You're not burning through your reserves for something frivolous. Your safety is number one. And if that means that you need to get new tires now, because the roads aren't that good, then that just means you're not going to have to do that in the future. So it is okay. I thanked her for reaching out to me and talking about it.
Gary, the past year, we know that the racial wealth gap has deepened. It is wider, it is deeper, and it's frankly very worrisome. How do you think an emergency fund can help? If you could talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing to try to help people save more.
Absolutely. We happened to do a study where we went out and interviewed low-wage workers to find out how they manage without savings. And what we found was a couple of things. One is if you're working at a restaurant and you're living off tips, what happens is that person might get $250 that day or $200 that day. And that what disrupts their situation is the fact that they might have an emergency, their car goes out or something else happens, and they have nothing to fall back on. And so this idea of developing savings, they end up dipping into their retirement or longer term savings that they've been able to have. And so we've been working on some pilots to look at if folks had an emergency reserve account for home mortgage, for example, or they had a reserve account that was a sidecar with their retirement savings. We found that most low-wage workers and middle-wage workers actually would save more in that period of time. And so we've got all kind of anecdotal evidence that says that employers can actually do better by their workers when they set up these possibilities for emergency savings for those employees. In addition to that, I think what we do know is that most folks actually do save, meaning during the pandemic, we're seeing a lot more people do some type of savings as a part of their regular strategy, but that then they go into those savings for things that may not necessarily be an emergency or may be something that comes up that they have to pay for right away. And so the question of really creating these funds, and that, that's part of what we're working on, so that folks can actually go into those funds for emergency as opposed to just going on a trip, or as you mentioned earlier. So what we're seeing and what we're working on is providing technical assistance and support to organizations and businesses so that they can really set up these accounts that they work for their employees.
You touched upon a lot of things there. And I think one thing that's very unique about the past year is the fact that people have been saving money in some way and how they've been doing it and why. I see you nodding, Greg, and I was going to ask you about it. If you could talk a little bit about the dynamics of the past year, stimulus money, and what you see going forward and how that could impact the way people save. Greg, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, we look at this very regularly. We've looked at it for more than a decade in terms of how people are positioned in terms of their emergency savings. And one of the things that we had found was that last year, with the benefit of stimulus, the percentage of households that had no emergency savings at all was actually the lowest in 10 years. So think about that. We had the worst recession since in 90 years. But yet the percentage of households with no emergency savings was actually the lowest it had been. And that, is a testament to the fact that there were stimulus payments coming in that enabled people to build a little bit of a cushion if they didn't need that for bills immediately. Also, the curtailment on activities and spending meant that a lot of people that weren't going to movies and concerts and ball games, that they were putting money into savings as well. So I think there's an aggregate benefit there, but that's not to overlook the vast hardship that people have experienced. I mean, we found that 42% of households are still earning less now than they were pre-pandemic. So a lot of those households, although they may have emergency savings, there's a good chance they're burning through a little bit more of each month.
And Greg, are you worried, when the situation changes, when the economy really opens up again, do you think those emergency savings will be depleted faster than you'd like to see them?
In a way, yes, but I also think you're going to see really, a little bit of each. You're going to see, and Margarita had kind of touched on this earlier, where the person who, once they start to save, they become what I call, a saver of conviction. In other words, they really get wrapped up in the idea that they have savings, and then they don't want to touch it. So then all of a sudden they look at their spending with a much more discerning eye because they don't want to have to dip into that savings that they worked so hard to put away. On the other hand, I mean, we all know people who, if they've got $10 in their pocket, it burns a hole in their pocket, right? And so I do have some concerns that there are households that have been able to accumulate emergency savings over, say, the last year that will burn through it in a, quote, back to normal type environment. But in aggregate, I do expect that we're going to continue to see more people that have savings that previously didn't. And they're going to be reluctant to part with that because of the fact that the memories of the economic fallout, the income disruption remain very fresh. So I don't think all those spendthrift habits are necessarily going to come back. I do think you're going to see people holding on to almost that depression era mindset of being a little more conservative on spending and accumulating savings.
Margarita, do you think millennials, the younger people, will have, Greg just alluded to this a little bit, but do you think millennials and Gen Z will be more mindful about saving for a rainy day, more worried about it, or do you think it'll have the opposite effect on them?
I do think that they will be more mindful. The one thing that I think that I've noticed that's become more acceptable, and this is very relevant for communities of color, is multi-generational households. I've noticed that it's become more acceptable for people to, live at home. Some people, again, every family is different, but particularly if you're working from home or you were in an urban area, that's what I've noticed among the children of my clients as well as younger clients. Like, oh, well, why would I sign a lease when my boss lets me work virtually? I've been productive. I think that they are, I'm amazed. We hear so much data about how millennials and Gen Z like to spend. But just like with any generation, I don't think we should be making generalizations about an entire generation.
I agree. I'm wondering, Gary, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to put a little bit of brackets around this. One, for the audience, even a small amount of savings can make a big difference. Meaning, according to Saver Life, as little as $250 greatly increases someone's chances of achieving housing security, as an example. And that can be a baseline. But the AARP came out with a study that says that households that achieve liquid savings of just $2,452 at any point are significantly less likely to experience extreme financial hardship up to 3 years later. So I'm trying to put this within the grasp of people listening, that you can start with small amounts of savings, develop the discipline to save, and you can really change the pattern and conditions of your situation when you have an emergency. So it's in your reach to make a difference with saving for emergencies.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, we were talking about millennials, and that's one of the things we've looked at for quite some time, even in the decade-long expansion that preceded the pandemic. What we noticed was there was a much more of an inclination toward savings, specifically emergency savings, among millennials. And many of them, of course, had a front row seat, either themselves or their parents, to the dot-com bust and then the Great Recession. And so a lot of those habits were ingrained. And what we had seen for years running was, among millennials in particular, relative to other generations, they placed the highest priority on building emergency savings. And when we polled on financial regrets, one of the things that really jumped out was millennials in particular, that was their top regret, was that they didn't have enough. And that those regrets about emergency savings even trumped other things like worries about too much credit card debt or student loan debt. The top worry was, do I have enough emergency savings? And again, that was when the economy was good. That was even before coming into the pandemic.
And Greg, was that prompted by the crash of 2008, 2009 and seeing their parents and how it impacted them? Or do you think there were other dynamics at play?
I think that absolutely had a lot to do with it. I mean, even the oldest millennials were starting, who are now 40, were starting out their careers at that point in time. And so, yes, I think there was, definitely that having to have that front row seat, if you're experiencing it themselves, seeing it among their parents. And there was also a greater attitudinal shift after the Great Recession, where all of a sudden people realized how important emergency savings was, that you weren't going to be able to count on your house going up in value and doing the saving for you. The dot-com bust had kind of disavowed people of the notion that, they could just, buy tech stocks and they would go up and do the saving for them. People began to realize, there's no substitute for actually having money in the bank that I could get to in an emergency. The problem was, despite a decade-long plus economic expansion, even though people realized they were behind and prioritized building savings, we didn't see the needle move very much until very late during that period of time. 2017, 2018, 2019 was when we finally started to see the needle move.
And Margarita, not to diss my generation, Gen X, but I'm just curious, it might be your generation too. How did Gen X, how did they shake out in terms of saving, planning for emergencies, just saving in general versus other generations? Because my understanding is from recent Federal Reserve data, we're doing pretty well.
So I love this question, and I'm from Generation X too. And in fact, when I look at my clients, the clients from Generation X, they come in and they are so precious. They're like, yeah, I know I'm here today because, listen, I'm not skeptical, but I know I can't count on Social Security. So my wife and I are here today. We might not have $500,000 today, but we have the capacity to do that. So they understand that they didn't have student loan debt, but they don't want that for their kids. So they are feeling sandwiched. Their kids haven't fully launched yet. Maybe they're starting to launch. They still need to save for retirement, and their parents are around. So I think that, Xers, they need some love and attention as well, because we need to help them coordinate, what's the best way to pay for college. Many of them have saved, but how do I take the money out? Do I do pre-tax retirement, Roth? All these questions, I find that. So yes, I'm so glad that you asked about Generation X. Every generation has a particular, pain point, concerns, threshold, and experience. And theirs is different. And it doesn't mean it's better, it's just different. And so we need to make sure that we're mindful of that when we're talking to them.
And I think, every generation obviously is going to be impacted by the past year. I mean, it's going to shape the way we all live our lives going forward, I think. That said, the topic of today's panel is how to prepare and plan for an emergency. And so now we want to get into the nitty gritty of it. Greg, how do you actually save for an emergency? What do you do? How does it work?
I've always said that successful saving is all about the habit. This is not a switch you can flip at some point where you say, well, I'll start saving once I get a raise and or earning a certain amount of money, or once I get the student loans paid off, then I'll start to save. Once we get the car paid off, then what happens is that just gets kicked down the road further and further. And whether it's saving for emergencies or saving for retirement, you're sort of perpetually behind. So I'm a big fan of automating this. And I preach this to my kids who are, teenagers and in the workforce. Have a direct deposit from your paycheck into a dedicated savings account. Start that habit with the very first paycheck, because if you can master that habit of saving 10 or 15% of your income when you're young and your income is low, that will stay with you through life as your earnings grow. And then you're in a habit where you're saving and saving more meaningful amounts of money. Unfortunately, people that don't get that habit started, I've seen this where, years go by and they're just kind of spinning their wheels financially. They haven't made the headway on paying down the debt, but they're not building up the savings either. And by automating that, making that savings happen before you even roll out of bed on payday morning, that's half the battle right there. I mean, even if you are treading water in other areas financially, like paying down debt, having automated the savings, each paycheck, you're adding to that cushion.
I love automated everything, honestly. Gary, tell me a little bit about how employers can help people in this process.
Well, employers can play a central role in helping their financial health of their employees. One of the ways to do that is to be able to set up accounts that actually, very similar to what Greg just said, it would be huge for employers. We're working at the federal level to actually create, there's several bills that we're working on to actually create these sidecars so that people can actually contribute alongside their retirement, et cetera. So it's all automatic. It's all there for the employee. And we know that when that happens automatically, it really helps those employees. And employers really have they're really going to save a lot if they stabilize that employee when they're having an emergency. They know that that money is there. It really creates the conditions by which they don't have to rehire, which is costly. It creates the conditions by which that employee is feeling comfortable coming to work because they don't have the worry hanging over them that we talked about earlier. And then finally, I'd say one of the big things that employers could do is actually provide financial counseling and help to their employees. Bring in Marguerite and other financial planners to actually work with their employees. Huge, because once people start understanding the issues, they actually transform many of them can transform. But we also have to think about folks that have very low incomes within this equation and really upping their incomes as a part of how we stabilize them in the workforce.
Can you talk a little bit more about financial education for lower income workers? Because it's not, people aren't necessarily sitting in front of a computer all day. They can't, check things or it just makes things a little bit more complex in the way things are communicated.
Yeah, going to a financial advisor, first of all, is a trust issue, meaning you have to establish trust with that person that you're having that relationship with. And so one of the things that some employers have done is bring those folks in, but also set up time for them really to develop a deep relationship with that financial planner, in part because in that trusted relationship actually builds the ability for advice to be back and forth, et cetera. So part of that is employers actually being proactive about their strategy. What is your strategy if you're an employer for your employees' financial health? You can go to our website at prosperitynow.org. We have a plethora of information on there for employers to think about this. We put together roundtables last year with CFPB with employers, both large employers and small employers. What we found is all of those employers really wanted to focus and think about ways to better increase their ability to have some supports and assistance for the employees. But it's not organized, and it's not done from birth through you getting older. We actually need to do much more at the elementary and college level in order to educate people about their financial health. Without that, without some kind of structured system around it, you really can't make the big change that we need to make in this country around emergency.
That's a whole other panel there, Gary, about financial literacy, but it is Financial Literacy Month, we know that. And I know I agree with you. I think that there's so much that employers can do, kids can learn in school, and obviously that we can learn from each other, generationally, to have people pass down the knowledge. But I also find that, because I've been doing personal finance for so long in the office, I'm the person that everyone comes to. And I'm sure, Greg, you are too in your office when they have to sign up for benefits or 529, how much should I put in the 529 this year, that kind of stuff. So emergency fund is just one more thing that somebody's going to come and ask me about, I think, in the coming weeks. Greg, specifically, and Margarita too, I would love for both of you to address. Maybe I'll go to Margarita next. This is the $1 trillion question. The $1 zillion question is, how much should I save for an emergency? Because I've seen people say 3 months, worth of expenses, 6 months worth of expenses, a year, 5 years. I've seen it so many. So how do I know how much to save for an emergency? Margarita, I'll let you start.
Sure. That is a $64,000 question. So for someone starting out, to hear, especially if they're a young professional or they're living paycheck to paycheck, to tell this individual that you need 3 to 6 months cash that are sitting around earning nothing, it's going to be a tough sell. But I agree with what Greg said. What you do is you automate. Maybe it is on payday. It's $25 a check, $50 a check. What the amount doesn't really matter. What matters is the habits. And for somebody who's starting out, they don't have anything, right? So even if they get a month or two, that's progress. And then as they start to build savings and maybe they pay down debt, then you can increase that. So for young professionals, I say, they don't have anything. So 1 to 3 months, gig economy, self-employed, it's probably going to be closer to 6 months. And retirees, the day you retire, you're not going to put all of your portfolio in cash and bonds, but you need to make sure that you have money available for you to pay your bills, that you don't have to sell at an inopportune time. So I would say, we've heard anywhere from 3 months to 2 years.
And I haven't said this, by the way, and I'm sorry if I haven't, if you're watching and joining us. If you have any questions, please put them in the I believe, the comment chat box. And I'm not seeing them here in real time because I'm looking on another platform, but they're going to be fed to me. And I would love to ask our experts any questions that people who are watching have. Greg, just to go back to my original question though, how much money do I need to save? Can you talk a little bit about that? And where do we put the money? Where does it go?
Well, yeah, I agree with what Margarita said. I mean, to tell people that you need, 6 months or whatever worth of expenses to somebody who's just starting out, it's like go climb Everest, right? I mean, it's just, really seems like an insurmountable goal. But I think it's really important to stress that that's the destination. That's not the starting point. That's what you're aiming for over time. And it's a moving target. So, what was 3 months or 6 months worth of expenses when you're 25 is not what 3 months or 6 months of expenses are when you're 35 or 45 or 55. It's just, that target keeps moving. And that goes back to why it's so important to be in that habit of saving, because particularly in the early years of your career, your expenses often grow faster than your ability to save and keep up with that. So the reality of it is getting to that 6 month savings cushion, for example, that's going to be a matter of habit over the course of many years before you get there. Not only because it takes time for the savings to build, but also because the target itself is moving over time. Another thing is there's a reason they call it personal finance, right? That, it's personal. So ultimately, how much emergency savings do you need? That's going to be highly tailored to the individual. I've been a big proponent of 6 months worth of expenses, and that's expenses, not income. That's 6 months worth of expenses for most people. But if you're in business for yourself, or if you're a sole breadwinner, you need more than that. You need 9, maybe 12 months. And particularly for those who have fluctuating seasonal income, or have, they're in a profession, they're a hockey coach, or they get fired all the time, right? So, that in that case, you're going to need more. And you really need it to your own personal financial situation. Where to put it? I'm a big fan of online savings accounts. It's liquid. You can link it to the checking account you have in your current bank, so you don't have to move everything. Now, this is a supplement, not a replacement for what you have. And so you can get to it when it's needed, and it's federally insured. So the money is safe. You can get to it. You have that liquidity when it's needed, and the returns are better than what you're going to get at most banks and in money market mutual funds.
Gary, if I have the opportunity to save in an emergency fund like I would in a retirement account through my employer, can you tell me a little bit about, is it the same rubric? I mean, 3 months, 6 months, or is it just the getting it automatically done? And where is that money going to be saved?
Yeah, I think Greg had it right and Marguerite on the timing of how much savings you save. So I think that makes sense. I think that in terms of automatic savings and these things, I actually think that what we need to be able to do is for those folks to make it easy as possible. So this idea of seamless savings, we know that really works. The problem is that technically we need to set up the legal structure for that to work for those employees. Where that money goes actually could be going into short-term accounts, so that money actually earns a good return on that investment, but is not locked up so that person can't access it. Very much like retirement accounts right now. If you put money in a retirement account, there's a lot of rules about how you can take that money out, and there's a lot of penalties behind it. So we need to actually create the infrastructure so that people can actually put money in and be able to get that money right away, so that they can actually use that in their savings. And so there are different money markets and other tools and instruments that employers use, and other companies actually offer a wide variety of products and services that could be utilized for this purpose.
That's great.
Others.
Go ahead, Greg. And also, I just wanted to mention too, I think one big surprise in the past year is the fact that people weren't rating their retirement accounts, even though, as you said, Gary, there are a lot of rules, but you would think that if people were desperate and they had a little bit of money saved up and they needed it, that they would tap it. And it was normal. It wasn't, the activity wasn't different than it had been in prior years, pre-pandemic. So just wanted to put that out there, but go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, to Gary's point, I mean, when we look at, say, retirement savings over time, we've noticed that participation rates, deferral rates, and the consistency with which people put money away have all gone up when we switched to this opt-in, where new employees are automatically opted into retirement plans. So, to Gary's point about having the infrastructure in a similar way for emergency savings, if people were automatically defaulted in to an employer-based plan around emergency savings, that also helps move the needle and kind of gets that habit started.
Got it. Margarita, is there anything you wanted to add there? I saw you looking excited.
Well, sure. Well, one of the things I really liked what Gary was saying about financial education in the workplace. I've actually helped with these programs, EAP. People want to turn to their employers for unbiased information. What are you talking about, Margarita? So caregiving, that is a huge financial concern. It's also very positive. Caregiving when you become a first-time parent. What do? Caregiving for aging relatives as well. So I think this notion of having financial education to help people become financially resilient and provide educational content that is specific to these life events can be very helpful.
Great. And I'm just going to remind people, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A box here, because we're going to go to the Q&A portion in a couple of minutes. But before we do that, I just want to make sure that I give each one of you the chance to talk about anything that we didn't address so far. Greg, I don't know if there's anything relevant to saving for an emergency that I didn't ask you about, but speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, what we see is that when it comes to prioritization, people prioritize savings much more than paying down debt, particularly now. We found in a recent poll that when it comes to what's your greatest focus, is it saving or is it paying down debt, 60% of households said they're focusing on saving. So that message has hit home. People are taking strides to move that needle on emergency savings, and that's a positive.
So that shows a real financial knowledge, though, Greg, because it's a smart financial move. Interest rates are low. I mean, I'm assuming if people have high interest debt, that may not be the same case. I don't know.
Well, it's not either or in the sense that, I get the question a lot, as I'm sure you do too. And I'm sure Gary and Margarita do as well. Well, what should I do first, pay down debt or save? Well, it's not either or, do both. And that's where having that automated payroll deduction for emergency savings and retirement savings gets that done first thing. And then you can focus with your net pay on accelerating the debt repayment. So it's not a matter of choosing either or, but I think in terms of where we're seeing people prioritize their financial efforts, that message about the importance of saving has really hit home, and the numbers reflect that.
Margarita, is there anything else you want to add about saving for an emergency?
Well, I mean, I just echo what Greg said, particularly this is relevant for people who didn't have to make student loan payments. People are like, do I make the payments? Do I not make the payments? Well, I mean, if you're not earning interest, perhaps you take that money and you build up your savings. Or if you don't have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan, then you take that savings, you put it in a retirement account, and you get some tax savings. So it's not either or, but it's personal. It's personal finance. So it just depends on what's right for you and your situation. That's my takeaway.
And Gary, give me a little bit about, I'll let you add on any comments too, but I also would love to know your legislative outlook in this administration, and is there an interest in this particular topic?
Yes, there definitely is an interest. I think the conversations you see around addressing the issue of student debt is tied directly to emergency savings in part. What happens on tax day when people get earned income tax credit and other things? What do they do with those funds when they get them? We found that people that actually put away some of that money in emergency savings really matters, that they get from other government programs, be they state, federal programs. And then I think that the issue related to this is the issue of predatory lending. Many of our folks that have emergencies end up going to predatory lenders, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. And so we're really working in tandem with this on the bills on emergency savings, also working to address this issue of predatory loans and predatory lending practices that for low and moderate income people are just ravaging them and robbing them of any savings because they're paying that all in interest to predatory lenders. I think also, how do we work on this issue of converting the amount of people paying bad debt to savings? Meaning, how do you convert that bad debt over to a savings account for those individuals? So these are some of the things, but we also have to create incentives in the system for people to save. Match savings programs have been out there for a while, children's savings accounts and other kinds of savings accounts. If we had some match savings for emergency savings, it really would make a difference because people operate off incentives. I know I do. So the question is how do we create incentives in the system for people to save? It's nice for people to say save 6 months, but if you haven't gotten the discipline or the practice, so how can we actually make that happen? Our society will run better. People will be more secure if we create some mechanisms by which they're able to do that. And so I'm really a proponent of match savings in all of these different areas.
Great. I want to open it up to the Q&A portion. So I'd love to bring Vishal back into the panel, if that's okay. And actually, before we start Q&A, Vishal, I know you've been listening actively here and you've got your own perspective as a company that's providing emergency savings accounts. Is there anything you want to add to this conversation?
Thanks, Lauren. No, and I really, really appreciate and enjoy the conversation. I think, everyone hit on a lot of key points. Maybe the two things that I would just sort of pick up on is one is, how do we make this a habit, right? And because this is something people have to do their entire lives for it to work, right? You don't just sort of save for, 6 months and then you're done. And I think employers can play a role there, right? Because employers can, we certainly offer solutions. But employers can offer ways for their employees to save at work, to do it through payroll deduction, to start to make it as automatic as maybe putting money in a 401k might be. So I think they can play a role complementing all the other ways that people can certainly save for emergencies. And then the second I would just come back to it's also just really looking at somebody holistically, right? If somebody is really drowning in debt, it's tough for them to start saving again or start saving at all, right? And so we've got to understand where people are. And try to unlock some of those barriers that might be preventing them from getting on the path of some of the habits that we know are so foundational.
Great. One question I got, which I think is really great, and I guess raise your hand if you want to answer this one, is how do we prepare for the post-COVID revenge spending trend when it comes to saving for an emergency? All right, Greg, I'm just going to tell you, and you answer it. It sounds like a bank rate post. So how do we prepare?
Revenge spending and emergency savings sound like they're butting heads against each other. Yes, there's a lot of pent up demand for things like travel and entertainment and those type of things. And so yes, a lot of households that haven't been able to spend money in those areas over the last year plus have they've accumulated a stash and they're ready to let loose. I think it's really important at the household level that you have to separate that from what is your emergency savings. If you were weak on emergency savings to begin with, and you've been able to build that up either through stimulus payments, tax refunds, or just not spending in other areas, be very cognizant about just how much of that you're going to run down on your so-called revenge spending. Set a budget, hold yourself to that, but maintain that discipline of having emergency savings and adding to it regularly with each paycheck.
Great. And then this is a question I actually got on Twitter that somebody asked me, which I think is a really good one. Does saving for an emergency using an employer plan make a worker more likely to be more loyal to their company? I don't know if Gary, you want to take that, and then maybe Vishal, if you have any thoughts too. So, setting up some kind of even a retirement account, but also an emergency savings account. Would workers be likely to stick with the company longer?
Yeah, in our qualitative study, we found that employees that had some type of assistance and help on their emergencies actually stayed at those companies longer, felt appreciated, felt that the company cared about them. Those type of things were in that bundle. So we know that employees are really smart and they actually get when a company actually goes out of their way for their financial well-being, or helps them with their with financial planners, or provides them with assistance. So we know that from and when we talk to employers, both small and large, we found that they actually want to do something, actually many of them want to do more. And they're trying to think about ways of how they enhance the quality of the work experience for their employees, which includes financial health.
Vishal, what would you add there? I'm sure this is something that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
Sure. No, I would add, we've seen that offering financial wellness benefits to employees can correlate then with better employee retention. Either because of how employees value that benefit, viewing it as unique. And I think when you come specifically to emergency savings, I think, the qualitative dynamic there really is, if we can help people save for emergencies, if we help them avoid getting in trouble, one of the things is, I think I think one of the things we can help employees with is really becoming more engaged at work, right? They're not as stressed out about their finances. They're more engaged at their workplace. They're more engaged with their employer, and I think those are all the benefits you get from emergency savings. You get it from a range of financial wellness tools, but I think it's all about deepening that connection to the employee, both reinforcing how valuable they are, but also helping them sort of really focus their energy on what they're doing at work rather than being distracted by financial stress.
We have another question, and I'm not exactly sure I understand it, so I'm going to try and reframe it. But if the person who's asking the question wants to follow up, feel free to do so in the Q&A, and keep asking questions, by the way, because I need more of them. But the question is about the fact that PPP is now available for sole proprietors. But how do you make up for the lost ground? This particular person couldn't collect unemployment for, I think, 10 months due to COVID. So how does PPP factor into all of this? Because I think when it goes away, things are going to be very different financially for people. Greg, you want to take that?
Well, I don't have much of an answer on the PPP aspect of it, though I will say, to kind of come back to our greater point about the importance of emergency savings, even people that were eligible for unemployment, and at first many self-employed were not, but even those that were eligible for unemployment, because of the backlog on state systems in the early stages of the pandemic, people waited months for that money to come in. And those that had emergency savings, that was sort of their buffer to get them to that point where those regular unemployment checks started to come in. Those that didn't have emergency savings were in a particularly hard spot. They were really dependent on that money coming in. And a lot of states had these overwhelmed systems that just took months for people to get that first unemployment check.
Margarita, for your clients who have, do you have clients that have collected PPP?
Sure, I was going to speak about PPP, so thank you for the opportunity. So with this third round, sole proprietors are in fact eligible. And I always tell clients that as far as PPP is concerned, you want to make sure that you don't just put all that money in your checking account and let it evaporate. You don't want it commingle. It is great that you received this PPP loan, but the ultimate goal is to make sure you qualify for loan forgiveness. And you qualify for loan forgiveness, making sure that you use that for payroll. You may say, well, I don't have payroll. Well, if you are sole proprietor, you are the employee and the employer. So to our listener who typed that, yes, having that money is going to be helpful because it can allow you to sustain your business. My advice to you is to make sure that you keep good records so that you can account for how you use those funds so that you could ultimately qualify for loan forgiveness.
Yeah, and I did get a little bit of follow-up. The person said, right, but the emergency savings was gone before PPP came in. So it was a little bit of what you were talking about, Greg, that people who saved for an emergency had the bridge until the government stimulus money arrived. And granted, this is a very unique situation. Hopefully none of us will have to go through this again. But what lessons can we learn from the past year financially in terms of saving for an emergency? Gary, I'd love for you to take that one.
Yeah. So not everybody's similarly situated. in this situation. So we know, for example, that low and moderate income people, people of color, et cetera, are not similarly situated. So their conditions are different when we come to savings approaches and how you actually get there from here. And so I actually think that, and the research actually shows this out, is that by creating incentives and alternative methods of savings for people that are not situated, that don't have an income or very little income as example, or using their income in a different way is helpful when we think about, how do we structure emergency savings programs for that population. You've heard a lot of my comments around low and moderate income people. The reason that I'm framing that the way that is because a lot of times we develop programs that actually one size fits all. And we really need to be able to target the development of savings programs and savings interventions to the population. That's why we're taking so much time and really looking at different populations along a strata, because if you're a low income person that's making very little money and to come in and say, oh, you need to save X when you can't even barely make ends meet, that's one thing. But even if you're that low income person, you can still start really developing those habits that we talked about earlier. And we've been able to demonstrate and prove that that actually works. So the next strata up is middle income, different quotient. So I just want to caution us against just taking one size and putting it over this as if it's going to fit, because it's going to be different for each of those stratas. Some of the basic things are the same, but they're different. So I hope that that's helpful in some way.
Absolutely. And I think we all probably may know somebody who might be in a higher income bracket too, who didn't save for an emergency and all of a sudden scrambled to find money. I mean, it's, as you said, it's not one size fits all in terms of how we help people, but the emergencies happen no matter how much money you have, I guess is what I'm saying.
No doubt. And the reality of it is that if you don't actually learn it, or I'm back to that, you don't learn how to build these habits from an early age, the older
listen to Gary,
the harder it gets to do. And so really, I remember getting out of college, I didn't have a clue. And, I struggled a little bit because, I get money and I didn't really know what I was really supposed to do with it other than money went in and came out. But it took some interventions for me to actually begin to save. So I'm personalizing this because people actually go with personal story. Everybody's feeling this. And so we actually need to kind of take it off the high level and put it down where people can understand everybody's been through some kind of struggle with money. And it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, or if you haven't gotten the rudiments of the basic financial education that is necessary for you to change. And then there's structural issues within how we frame these issues within our society that also play a big role. And that's why we're working on structural areas so that we can actually incentivize people to actually, it just becomes natural as breathing for somebody to put away emergency savings. That's the kind of world we want to create.
I love that world. I think we all really love that world. We only have a couple minutes left. Vishal, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we say goodbye to everybody.
So first, thank you again. This was a terrific conversation. And I would just, build on Gary's comments by saying, everyone's situation is different. I think maybe one other thing I would add is really just looking at your whole financial situation, right? So if your investments are really risky, if you have too much credit card debt, if you're maxed out on your credit cards, right? All of these things will compound when something like the pandemic happens. And the more you can kind of maybe put as many of those things in good shape, even if you don't have 2 years worth of, 6 months worth of savings, but you have a few months, but everything else is in good shape, you'll be in a much better position if something like this happens. And I'm optimistic. I think just given what we've lived through, that I think a lot of Americans will be thinking about things a little bit differently as we go forward, even if there might be a little bit of revenge spending along the way.
I would love to do this panel a year from now and look at the data and see if people's habits have been changed, if they have bigger emergency savings, or if the revenge spending is just, thrown out the window. It'll be really interesting to see. But I wondered if we could just have quick last thoughts from each of our panelists. Greg, is there anything you want to say before we say goodbye to all the nice people who are here watching?
Well, the importance of emergency savings, it's like building a moat around your financial stability. It's your buffer between you and high interest rate debt or the predatory lending that Gary was talking about. Again, just really underscoring the importance. Yes, everybody's situation is different, and all for the infrastructure that helps facilitate that saving so that everybody can have that much needed cushion.
Okay, Rita, real fast, what do you have to say?
Sure. Well, no one planned for a pandemic. We didn't plan, but it's best to be prepared and think about progress. You may not have 6 months, but if you have 1 or 2 months, that's progress, and continue on your financial journey. And I'd love to be back 1 year later.
Okay, great. Gary, will you come back a year later with your...
Start today. Don't wait. Start today. Pay yourself first. Start today.
Great. Vishal, you want to be the last word?
No, I wrapped up. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, good. Well, my last word is I want to see you all a year from now. I think we should do this again. I want to thank everybody for joining us. I want to thank you, especially Greg, Margarita, Gary, Vishal. This has been such a great conversation. And my hope is if one person opens up an emergency savings account, we've done our job. So we will see you in a year from now. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.